it is important for us to make sure that we elect leaders that are at least the closest that we can find to a righteous standard. The closest that we can find to a righteous standard. And that means supporting these 5 divine institutions. Now, there's one more criteria that we should use, and I want to cover that very briefly in the next 7 or 8 minutes before we wrap up. And that is the question of a nation's relationship to the Jewish people and to Israel as a state. How a nation views the Jews. Those who are antagonistic to the Jews are anti-Semitic, and throughout history God has judged anti-Semitic nations, even when God raised up those nations, such as Assyria and Babylon and Rome, raised them up to bring discipline on Israel. Because God could use them in a military manner to wipe out Israel, but they didn't have to succumb to anti-Semitism. When they did, then God judged them. And this is grounded on the principle of Genesis 12:3. Those who bless you, he promised Abraham, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. God will judge those who treat the Jew unrighteously and unfairly and who treat Israel unfairly. Now, when you bring up Israel, you bring in this whole question of Zionism. What is Zionism? And see, some people get the idea that if you're talking about supporting Israel, that means you agree with every decision they make. Well, that's not true at all. There are many decisions that have been made in the history of Israel and its founding that were unrighteous, and that doesn't mean that we support that. What we support is the right of the Jewish people to a national homeland, to national sovereignty, homeland and land that is established by law and was established by law, was given to them by law, an international agreement, and that they have a right to defend that. And that is what Zionism is. Zionism doesn't say that you have to support everything Israel did. I mean, there were atrocities committed by the Irgun during the War of Independence in 1948. There have been many other decisions that have been made that we just can't support. But that is not the essence of, that's not what Zionism is all about. Zionism is the belief that the Jewish people have a right to their own nation in the land God gave to Abraham. And guess what? This belief was held by many of the leaders in American history and early American history. For example, John Quincy Adams desired that the Jews again would be able to go to Judea and establish an independent nation, once restored to an independent government and no longer persecuted. Abraham Lincoln believed that the Jews should be restored to their homeland, that this he referred to as a noble dream shared by many Americans. And he referred to, he said in a conversation with Canadian Christian Zionist Henry Monk, that the Jewish chiropodist of the president has so many times put me on my feet that I would have no objection to giving his countrymen a leg up. So the nation, America, had a positive view of the Jews, opened their doors to the Jews from the colonial period on, and saw this as important. And this was part of the whole move, as we've studied in the past, to establish Israel in the land. In Britain, you had British Restorationism. You have the very well-known Balfour Declaration, which is the foundation. Oh, hit too many buttons too fast. Stop and go back. Balfour grew up at his mother's knee reading the Bible. He's reared in a Christian home where he was taught the Old Testament. He wrote a book on Christian philosophy and theology, had many high offices in British government and prime minister, and he was the one who wrote the statement that was the legal foundation for Israel being granted by the British government coming out of World War I, a national homeland. This is known as the Balfour Declaration. Here's a photocopy of the original declaration, which reads, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. This was voted on. The wording was approved by the British Cabinet on October 31st of 1917, and then on November the 3rd, it became official policy of the British Empire. Prior to World War I, the Ottoman Turks had ruled the area from 1516 to 1918, and it was viewed as just part of southern Syria. It was just a district within the Ottoman Empire. There was no Palestine per se, country per se. There was no Syria. If you see on the map, there's no Jordan. There's no Saudi Arabia. You didn't have any nations there. Those were carved up artificially by the breakup of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. Here's another map that you can see that there's just the Arabian Peninsula where you have various independent Arab states. You have Mesopotamia in the area of modern Iraq, at Persia, which did exist. They're not Arabs. They're a totally separate totally separate nation. They weren't in the Ottoman Empire. And you have just the region of Palestine. This was just an administrative district within the Ottoman Empire. But after World War I, you see the carving up of Syria and Lebanon, Iraq, Transjordan, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, these particular areas. And during the war, there was a secret agreement made between the French and the British called the Sykes-Picot Treaty that said that they would carve up this area of the Middle East into different zones of occupation after the war. And in 1918, the League of Nations gave a mandate to the French to administer the northern area, the blue zones, and the British to administer the red zones and the pink zone, the B zone there, those areas. And there was established a mandate based on the League of Nations from 1920 to 1946, and we see these boundaries here. And this was to be given to the Jews. All of this land was to be given to the Jews based on the legal document of the Balfour Declaration and the mandate of the League of Nations. But after a while, due to pressure from the Arabs, because oil had just been discovered prior to World War I, the British began to fold. Their high water mark was the Balfour Declaration. From there on, they just began to fold. And so they decided they would give Jordan to the Arabs. Now, what we need today is politicians, leaders in America that will say, Palestinians want a homeland, it's called Jordan. The land on the west side of the Jordan River, that's Israel. If you want to live in a Palestinian state, go to Jordan. That was the legally established Palestinian state, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, coming out of World War I. And the UN was initially going to give them all of the land to the west of the Jordan, but of course they backed out of that, and in 1947 they had another partition plan just giving Israel very small portions of land, nothing that was, very little integrated or land that would give them strong defensible area, and a lot of the area, especially down south here in the Negev, was just desert. So the point that I'm making is we have to have leaders who recognize the legality of Israel's right to that land and who stand up and tell the Palestinians that they're just a bunch of liars. And there's no such thing as a Palestinian homeland, Palestinian state, or Palestinian people. This has just been made up. And those who are not Zionists are basically anti-Semitic. Now, there are a lot of people who want to argue that. There's a lot of debate about that, but I found an extremely articulate statement today defending the position that anti-Zionism is indeed anti-Semitism. And today, that's really it's not politically correct to be anti-Semitic because of the Holocaust, so it's cloaked in anti-Zionism. And this individual wrote the following. This is a letter, and it's an important letter, and I think it's important to read the entire letter. When it's done, I'll tell you who wrote it. Zionism, this person stated, is nothing less than the dream and ideal of the Jewish people returning to live in their own land. The Jewish people, the Scriptures tell us, once enjoyed a flourishing commonwealth in the Holy Land. From this they were expelled by the Roman tyrant, the same Romans who cruelly murdered our Lord. Driven from their homeland, their nation in ashes, forced to wander the globe, the Jewish people time and again suffered the lash of whichever tyrant happened to rule over them. Key thought is Zionism is the dream for the Jewish people to live in their own land. That is all it means, and to defend that. In this letter, this individual wrote, "You declare, my friend, that you do not hate the Jews. You are merely anti-Zionist." And I say, let the truth ring forth from the high mountaintops. Let it echo through the valleys of God's green earth. When people criticize Zionism, they mean Jews. This is God's own truth.